Hey guys, welcome back to Kerbal Space Program. Adam here. We are launching what is going to be the first of a fleet of drone interplanetary vessels. The basic thinking behind these ships is that they're going to be meant for kind of long-range cargo transports, long-range deliveries of supplies, base components, that sort of stuff to some of the further away planets. Obviously, when we have a crew on board, we want to kind of make the trip as efficient as possible. So I'm going to kind of keep my cargo and my crew vessels separated. So the idea is that we're going to deliver stuff ahead of time before crews arrive. I'm going to kind of make a rule for myself that before we land people on any planet, we need to land, like a unmanned mission of some sort, whether it's just a unmanned lander or a rover, that sort of thing. Kind of map the planet ahead of time and have some sort of basic communications network set up before we actually send anybody out there. Makes it a little bit safer, I suppose. Now, this was kind of an experimental launch vehicle here. These ships are fairly heavy, and I wanted it to get to orbit with as much fuel as possible, so I didn't have to send up anything to refuel it the first time out. I'm also going to be building a station that's going to basically be responsible for refueling these things. They're not going to go to the normal space stations. There's going to be just a drone station so they can pick up new fuel and all that kind of stuff when they return. So I'm having to manually balance the fuel here because I don't have the TAC fuel balancer. So we're just pumping fuel up into the upper sections to keep them topped off as best we can. These ships have something like 6,000 or 7,000. I believe they have a lot more than that, actually. Meters per second of delta V. Let's see here. Does it even say? Yeah, it's saying they have like 10,000. So when they're loaded, I think they're kind of designed to carry a cargo of a few tons with 6,000 or 7,000 meters per second of delta V. So they should be able to pretty much reach anywhere we need to. Moho might be a little marginal, but of course they're going to have enough fuel for the return trip because they'll be lighter on the way back, and if we really have to, we can have a Kethane mining operation out there and stuff. But I'm hoping to just return them to Kerbal with the fuel that they actually have. That'd be a lot simpler. So since this is the first time launching this vehicle, there was a lot of unknowns, but I had basically designed it in such a way that I needed these upper stage rockets to be firing as well, just to give it a little bit of extra thrust, and also to not... I don't like to have rockets on the thing that aren't firing, because it just kind of wastes fuel. It's weight that could be helping itself lift instead of just being dead weight. So just had to keep balancing the fuel. Things went pretty smoothly. We'll get a look at the ship here in a little bit. We're coming up into the sun here, so I skip forward a few seconds here. Alright, there we go, separating the main stage there. So there's a small transfer engine still attached, and then of course we have the larger engines going here still as well. So it's got one of the big, I think these are from the KW, yeah, they're KW rocketry pack. One of the big SAS units that kind of goes on the outside of the 3-meter parts. I really like those. It's got one of those, so it should have plenty of torque to deal with anything we need to deal with. It's got one of the 2.5-meter docking ports on the back to accept cargo. That's where that fuel tank with the little engine is attached right now in the middle there. They're a little weird looking, I suppose, but the idea really was more form over function. It's almost entirely fuel. Like there's very little on this that isn't fuel. It's just got its basic stuff it needs and some fuel. It's got small solar panels to keep it alive. I'm a little bit concerned that those might not be big enough at some point, because the dish does use kind of a lot of power, and when we get out to deeper space, we're not going to have as much solar power because of the inverse square law and all that stuff, stupid physics and nonsense. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. We might have to retrofit some of these in the future, put some generators on them or something, figure that out for Joule and all that stuff. But for the inner part of the solar system, these will probably even out to Duna. These will work just fine. So we're just going to burn up the fuel in that middle tank and we'll get that thing detached in a minute here. Alright, so we're just circularizing the orbit here. The idea is that we're just going to put these in parking orbit for now. I don't have the space station constructed for them yet, and frankly they probably don't really need it yet. I probably won't link them up with their cargo most of the time at the space station either, just because if I have, like, I'm going to be launching 6 of these vessels. If I have 6 of these in a space station all next to each other, I imagine that that will cause some pretty serious lag issues, and then when you add on cargo on top of that, it'll probably just be unbearable. So this thing's just going to sit here and wait for its cargo, basically waiting for an opportunity to launch to Moho. Is going to be our first experimental flight with this thing, see how that goes. So we have the core of the space station I was just talking about that's going to be servicing these things. I figured I'd probably just launch this station because it won't take too long to do. It's not needed yet because none of these have actually gone out anywhere, but I like building space stations a lot. We're going to have a pretty big infrastructure in orbit of Kerbal and the Mun and all that stuff, so I think I'm going to have a total of like 4 space stations in orbit of Kerbal is what I'm planning right now, and then like 2 in orbit of the Mun and 1 in orbit of Minmus, so it's kind of a lot of stuff, but you know, everything, I like the idea of things having special purposes, each station having its own, you know, its own assignment, basically what it's responsible for handling, especially with the way that lag gets when you have really big space stations. I probably could combine some of these and just make a giant space station, but the game just can't really handle that, unfortunately. So this is just going to go up into a fairly high orbit, and we'll get this thing detached and parked where it needs to be. So the second section of that space station is going up. These are the docking arms. I didn't have a fairing that could fit this, so it's not a very realistic launch, but in real life you would probably have little motors and stuff that could fold down and all that stuff, but I don't have infernal robotics, so I'm just going to launch it like this. It's good enough, whatever. If I had Ferrum Aerospace, I'm sure this wouldn't work, but Kerbal, the default aerodynamics, don't care, so neither do I. So we're just bringing this thing up to the station. I got my force roll on and everything, which makes it much easier to actually do this construction. I very much prefer using the mech jub docking, and I have my hand right there, my cursor right there near the docking thing, because it screws up, and a lot of times it fires all the RCS for no reason, and it kind of like can even destabilize your space station. So I wanted to make sure that that didn't happen and all that. So you can see there's some room for big fuel tanks up at the top. Those are those 2.5 meter docking ports are for. There's also 6, like I said, docking arms, because I'm planning on having between 6 and 12 of those transfer vehicles, and probably no more than 6 of them will ever be back at Kerbal, because they're going to be on long interplanetary journeys all the time. Pretty much, like, I want to keep one of those going for every launch window we have. There's going to be specialized versions that I'll end up launching that are really more designed for life support, so we can send a life support shipment out and all that stuff to any bases that we might end up having. Resupplying isn't one of my favorite things, but you know, it does add a lot of realism. I'm not going to be like rotating crews around Minmus and Kerbal religiously, but I will do it once in a while, and we do definitely need to keep all of the fuel up. So what we're doing now is, this thing still had some fuel left in it, and I actually wanted it to be in a slightly higher orbit so it's further away from other space stations. So we're going to go ahead and use the remaining booster here just to get up into a slightly higher orbit here. Alright, so we're launching, at this point, one of 2 of the large fuel tanks that are going to go to that station. It's basically a 3.5 meter fuel tank with a 2.5 meter RCS tank, so we'll be able to refuel everything fairly easily, have a good amount of fuel kept on board the station at any given time. I could have probably worked out a fairing for this, but I was lazy, and so I didn't. So that's pretty much what it ended up being. So we're already up here in orbit, and I kind of like these stepped fuel tank designs. I'm probably going to start integrating these onto some of my space stations and stuff. The KW rocketry pack really does add a lot in terms of you know, just your options with, especially with RCS, but with regular fuel too. This is a lot better. So this is just swinging around to the far side of the station, and we're trying to find our docking port. There it is. And it's all automatic from there. And MechJeb doesn't seem to be having as many issues with docking for whatever reason now. Still has some, but it's a lot better. And these definitely look like they have some bulk to them. Kind of like how they look better, honestly, than the spherical tanks that I use a lot. I don't know, they just kind of look better when there's only 2 of them. So this will probably be a solution I use for fuel tanks on several of my stations. Of course, it's going to be hard to get something this big out to Eve or anything, but I could probably send it empty and then fill it up there. But on Eve, that's a little bit more of a pain. I still don't know whether those docking claws work on Gilly or not, so I should probably figure that out, because we could probably fuel up around Gilly, because it's not really economical to get fuel from the surface of Eve and try to transport that into orbit at all. So missions out at Eve, we're going to have a lot of fuel that we're going to really be concerned about, because I would like to visit the surface and actually have the guys come back. That's one of my top goals, so we'll figure that out, I suppose. A little bit of a Fraps glitch there, but just docking the second one so you can get an idea of what the station is going to actually look like when it's more or less completed. I'll probably end up adding additional things onto it in the future, but it's a pretty bare bones station. It's really just a fuel depot is all it's really intended for. We are going to be building a space dock at some point in the future that's meant for the manned ships and actually retrofitting ships, because I do have the Kerbal attachment system. I can add certain elements to ships, and we'll have to do maintenance on the reactors on the ships as well, so we'll probably do that at a separate space station that's got the what are those, IXW something. It's a NASA warp ship pack, came with a pretty cool starport, docking port, Star Trek style, like a dry dock, and so I'll be using some of those. I'm pretty excited. They're big, and you know, even the small one is pretty big, but there's a really big one, and it's probably gonna be a little bit of a challenge to get those up in orbit. So we're just dropping off the reactor and the power generator for the station. I may need to send a bigger one up at some point in the future, because this thing is going to have a lot of ships docked to it, and you know, if they have to be on external power, then we'll probably want to have more power available. Now again, this is another really fugly looking weird launch we're doing here, but this is 3 communication satellites that are destined for MOHO, and they should have probably been strutted a little better, because it's wobbling quite a bit, but it ended up making it to orbit without too much trouble. You know, obviously these things always get better as you get higher up into the atmosphere, because you have less drag acting on them and all that stuff, and also less thrust. Like, this much thrust is problematic for it, but we need it to get off the ground. So I wanted to just send them all in a gantry together. So I kind of just like put together this really ugly launch gantry thing that's going to dock with the transfer vehicle. I'm just calling them Interplanetary Transfer Vehicle 1 for now. I'm going to give it a better name at some point, like for this series of vehicles. They probably won't get actual names, each one of them, because they're unmanned, but you know, I have to come up with a better name for what they actually do. So I neglected to put any real method of docking this thing on the actual unit, because I was trying to make this thing as light as possible with as few redundant pieces as possible. So what that means is that we are going to just drop this thing dead in space, back the transfer vehicle off that brought it up into orbit, just get that out of the way, and then we'll come in with the cargo ferry, and we'll actually hook up to this thing and get it on its way. We have quite a bit of time still till the transit window to MOHO. I know that MOHO is one of those planets that kind of doesn't matter as much if you're in the window or not, and it comes up an awful lot. But I still want to be as efficient as possible, because it takes a lot of fuel to stop at MOHO. So yeah, this thing's gonna hopefully have the rocket blast clear those. It looks like it will. It does. It actually, looking at it, it does have RCS on it. I don't know what happened with that. I think it just wasn't working well or something. But we got the relays all hooked up here. Yeah, those engines will definitely clear that. So this thing's just going to wait in orbit for a while, and I think that's where we're going to end it for today. And I will catch you guys next time. Thanks for watching.